Good morning, students. Today we are going to learn about friction. You might have seen driver of a car or truck slowing down the vehicle at the traffic signal. You too slow down your bicycles whenever needed by applying brakes, don't you? Have you ever wondered why vehicles stop when we apply brakes? Not only vehicles, any object moving over the surface of another object slows down and finally it stops without applying any external force. You must have seen a person kicking football and the football goes to some certain distance and finally it stops. Why does it stops? It stops cause an invisible force which is acting between the two surfaces in contact. Here the two surfaces are football and ground. It is because invisible force which acts between two surfaces in contact always opposes the motion. That invisible force is called friction. When a force acts on a moving object along the same direction of motion, the object starts moving faster. Similarly, when a force is applied on the moving object in an opposite direction, the object slows down and finally comes to rest. This is a common observation. So, this could have been caused by an invisible force that opposes the motion. This is the force of friction that resists the motion of moving objects. Hence, friction is the force that opposes the motion when the two surfaces in contact move or tend to move with respect to each other. It is an opposing force as it always acts opposite to the direction of motion. As you can see in the picture, friction is acting in the opposite direction of the motion. Now the question arises how friction is caused. Friction occurs whenever two bodies that are in contact move or tend to move with respect to each other. Microscopic examination of surfaces of various objects reveals that all the surfaces have irregularities. When two surfaces slide over each other, the irregularities of these surfaces interlock with each other. This interlocking opposes the motion between the surfaces in contact and gives rise to friction. Thus, the force of friction is basically caused by the interlocking of irregularities between the two surfaces that are in contact. When sufficient force is applied, the interlocks break and the body moves. Friction can produce the following effects. Number 1. Friction opposes motion. This means it prevents a stationary object from moving. It also slows down the moving object and stops it. Effect number 2. Friction results in wear and tear of the two surfaces in contact. Friction between tires of a vehicle and road causes the tire to wear away. Effect number 3. Friction produces heat. You must have observed in winters we rub our hands together to keep them warm. Where does this heat come from? The heat is produced due to the friction caused by rubbing your hands together. You can also rub your hand and feel the heat. The heat so produced is because of the friction between your two hands. Let us find out various factors on which friction depends. Nature of surface. A rough surface has more irregularities than a smooth surface. This suggests that the rough surface shows greater resistance to the motion, that is, greater friction. We will also perform an activity to show how friction depends on nature of surface. Weight of an object. A heavy object placed on a given surface will press harder into irregularities than a light object. So there will be greater resistance to motion, that is, greater friction. That is why you find it difficult to move heavier things. Area of contact. Unlike nature of a surface and weight of an object, friction is independent of the area of contact between two surfaces. We know that the level of interlocking decides the amount of friction between two surfaces, but the level of interlocking is entirely dependent on mass of the body. So, if more the mass, more the intensity of locking, thus more is the friction. That is why friction is independent of area of contact. Let us do a simple experiment. Make an inclined plane on the table. You can use a wooden board supported by a set of hooks. Mark point A on an inclined plane. Use a pencil to make it fall down from the inclined plane. Note the distance. Now spread a piece of cloth on the table. You can use any cloth. Make sure it is wrinkle free. Now repeat the experiment. Note the distance again. In which case the distance covered by pencil was minimum? Yes, in the second case, where the surface was not that smooth. This experiment shows that friction depends on the nature of the surface. There are 4 types of friction. First, there is static friction. Then there is sliding friction. Then there is rolling friction. And at the last, there is fluid friction. Static friction. The friction acting between the two surfaces which are in contact and placed at rest is called static friction. It tends to keep the object at rest. It is always equal and opposite to the applied force. When the force applied on a stationary object is smaller than the static friction, the object does not move and remains stationary. To move an object along a surface, the applied force must be more than the static friction. When the force applied on the stationary object is gradually increased, a stage comes when the object just starts moving. The maximum force required to make the object move on the surface of another object is called limiting friction. Now the object either slides or rolls on the surface of other object. This gives rise to sliding friction or rolling friction. Sliding friction. The friction that exists between the two surfaces when they are in contact, in which one of them slides on the surface of another, is known as sliding friction. When an object has started moving, the irregularities do not get enough time to interlock. So, a smaller force is needed to keep it moving compared to the force needed to move it from the rest. Thus, sliding friction is smaller than static friction. Let us do another experiment. For this experiment, we need few cylindrical pencils and a thick book. Place the pencils parallel to each other. Then place the book over it. Now push the book. You observe the pencils rolling as the book moves. Do you think it is easier to move the book in this way than to slide it? Do you think the resistance to the motion of the book is reduced? When one body rolls over the surface of another body, the resistance to this motion is called rolling friction. Rolling reduces friction. It is always easier to roll an object than to slide it over another. That is why it is convenient to pull a luggage fitted with rollers. Now you can understand why wheel is called the greatest invention of mankind. Rolling friction. The friction acting when an object rolls over the surface of another is called rolling friction. Rolling decreases friction and makes movement of things easier. Fluid friction. We have learned that solids experience friction when their surfaces move relative to each other. It has been found that fluids, by fluids I mean liquids and gases, also offer resistance to the motion of objects moving through them. The resistance offered by fluids is called fluid friction or drag. It depends on the shape of the object, speed of the object, and nature of the fluid. To reduce drag, a body must possess a streamlined shape. The outer bodies of ships, submarines, and boats are made streamlined so that they experience minimum amount of friction while moving through water. A swimmer streamlines his body while swimming. The bodies of airplanes are also streamlined so that the air offers least possible friction. The shapes of birds are evolved in such a way that they can fly effortlessly in the sky. Advantages of friction. Friction helps us to walk. Friction between our feet and ground enables us to grip the ground. In the absence of friction, we would slip and fall, as our feet will not be able to grip the ground. Vehicles such as two-wheelers and cars and buses are able to move on the roads because of the rolling friction between the tires and the road. Friction between the brake shoes and the wheels causes the bicycle to slow down or stop. The friction between paper and pen enables us to write. A matchstick lights up due to the heat produced by friction between the head of the matchstick and the lighting surface of a matchbox. Friction enables us to hammer a nail inside the wall. Despite being advantageous, friction also has some harmful effects. Let us learn some of the disadvantages of friction. Wastage of energy. A lot of energy is wasted to overcome the force of friction while initiating a motion in stationary objects. In the absence of friction, we can avoid the wastage of energy. Increase in fuel consumption. Automobiles and engines consumes more fuel to overcome the energy loss due to friction. Wear and tear. The soles of our shoes and tires of vehicles wear out due to friction. It also causes wear and tear in the moving parts of machines. Production of unwanted heat. Friction causes unwanted heating of the moving parts of machines. This leads to the wastage of useful energy as heat. Also, excessive heating can damage machine parts. Production of unnecessary noise. Friction is responsible for the unnecessary production of noise in many machines. We have already studied what is friction and types of friction. Now we are going to study how to reduce friction and methods to reduce friction. First method is by using lubricants. A lubricant is a substance that forms a thin layer between the two surfaces in contact. It decreases the irregularities between the surfaces and makes them smooth. Lubricants thus significantly reduce friction. Oil, grease, and talcum powder are common examples of lubricants. Here in the first picture you can see lubricant is being applied on a machine which will reduce friction produced by the machine. In the second picture you can see the action of lubricant. It is surface 1, it is surface 2, and in between the surfaces there is a thin layer of lubricant. It has decreased the irregularities between the surfaces in contact and has made them smooth. Another method to reduce friction is by using soap solutions. Soap solutions, as we all know, are slippery in nature. They are used to reduce friction in high-speed cutting and grinding machines, so that not only friction is reduced, but the heat produced during the process is rapidly taken away by the water present in soap solution. Another method to reduce friction is polishing surfaces. Rough surfaces produce more friction than smooth surfaces. As you have already seen in the experiment, rough surfaces produce more friction than the smooth surfaces. So, by polishing, we can make the surface smooth. Yet another method to reduce friction is by using ball bearings. Ball bearings are small spherical balls placed between two moving cylindrical surfaces. These balls roll between two cylinders and enable both cylinders to move over each other instead of sliding. Thus, ball bearings change sliding friction into rolling friction, which makes movement easier. As you can see in this picture, small spherical balls are placed between two cylindrical surfaces. Here I also have your most lovable toy spinner. It also contains ball bearings. It contains ball bearings. That's why it moves for a considerable period of time.
Now, there is improved results. It is basically for the fluid. Fluid friction can be minimized by giving a streamlined shape to the object moving through them. Now comes the question, can we reduce friction to zero by polishing or by adding large amount of lubricants? No, friction can never be entirely eliminated. No surface is perfectly smooth. Some irregularities are always there. Even the smoothest of surfaces have some irregularities present in them.
Sometimes it is desirable to increase friction. This can be done by increasing the roughness of the surfaces in contact. Tires of vehicles such as motorbikes, cars, buses, and trucks have deep grooves called treads. These treads increase friction between the tire and the road, providing a better road grip. This prevents skidding of tires on the road. Weightlifters apply some powder on their hands before lifting weights. This increases friction and helps them to get a firm grip. Athletes and mountaineers have spikes on the soles of their shoes. This increases friction and helps them to get a firm grip on the ground. When a ground or surface becomes slippery after rain, sand is spread over it to increase friction. The grinding stone used in the kitchen has rough surface. This provides appropriate friction for grinding purposes. Handles of cricket bats and bicycles are covered with rubber grips to get a firm grip. Screws provide more friction as compared to the nails, as they have threads around them to achieve a proper grip. The tiles used on the floors of a bathroom are designed with small grooves or gentle spikes on the surface. Such a design increases the friction between the surface of wet floor and our foot and protects us from slipping.
Now let me tell you an interesting fact through a story. Do you know friction has a very important role in the evolution of Homo sapiens? You may wonder how. We have seen that when we rub two surfaces together, friction comes into play. In the same way, early humans generated fire by rubbing two stones together and accidentally learned to cook, which enabled humans to eat more kinds of food and devote less time to eating and make do with smaller teeth and smaller intestines. Some scholars believe that there is a direct link between the advent of cooking, shortening of intestinal tract, and largening of brain. Since long intestine and large brains are both heavy energy consumers, it is hard to have both. By shortening the intestine and decreasing their energy consumption, it advertently opened the way to the jumbo brains of Homo sapiens. So, we can say that friction has made us what we are today.